Good evening and welcome to the HUUSD School Board meeting for January 7th, 2026. I'm Ashley Woods, the board chair, and we are calling the meeting to order at 6:03. First, we have new sound equipment here, so you might be bearing with us a little bit as we get used to it. We also have a new, Curtis has a new student aide named Chase. Give us a wave, Chase. Chase is going to be Curtis's second when he can't be here, and Chase is going to learn how to run our meetings for us. First thing we have is public comment. We see we have quite a few people in Zoom. If you would like to make a comment, please raise your virtual hand. Let's start with public comment. We'll start with Libby. If you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, yes, thank you for this school board meeting. I have two kids. One's in kindergarten at Waitsfield and one is in fourth grade. And at this meeting, I know there are many proposed cuts, and I'm hoping I know there's a phase one cut that was about $1 million, and I'm hoping to see a breakdown of what that cut represents. Sorry, that's my son. And also to voice my strong support for keeping both preschools open, Facein and Warren. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Elena, you can unmute and go next. Hold on one sec. Okay, you can go ahead.
Okay, hi. So I am the current preschool teacher at Warren right now. And even with the understanding that my words will not change the decision to cut 3 preschool programs in the Valley, I feel compelled to advocate for the children in our community who don't have a voice, including my 22-month-old daughter, Adeline. I've been teaching preschool for nearly 15 years, and what I've learned is that the quality of a preschool program is largely determined by the quality of interactions between teachers and children. A teacher's intentionality, deep knowledge of child development, and ability to co-regulate with individual children in the group are what make a program high quality. This is not just personal experience, it's supported by extensive research. When reviewing a spreadsheet, it's easy to overlook the countless meaningful interactions that occur between children and teachers each day. It's difficult to quantify intention, responsiveness, and emotional presence, but these elements are the reality of early childhood education and are foundational to children's learning and well-being. For those who have children or have spent time with young children, it's clear how much individual attention they need to feel loved, cared for, and seen. As classroom numbers increase, meeting those needs becomes increasingly difficult, and inevitably, the quality of a child's experience declines. I'd recognize that the financial challenges facing our schools are real. At the same time, I firmly believe that our youngest learners deserve access to high-quality preschool experiences that honor developmental needs and set a strong foundation for their academic future and their overall well-being. With preschool being many children's first school experience, it sets the foundation for their later years, making this time that much more important. Thank you.
Why isn't that working? It's not working. Hello, hello. Hello. Okay, really close. Do either of you have a comment? You got to come up and talk in there so everyone can hear you.
Oh,
okay. Next is online is Shelby. Give up Dr. Mike a second to turn you unmute, and then you can go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby Sims, and I'm a parent of an elementary school teacher and a preschool elementary school student at Warren and a preschool student at Warren. I have not been following in enormous, sorry for the background noise, enormous detail, all of the cost drivers and enrollment drivers around the proposed conceptual preschool closures. but I am generally concerned about it and wanted to lodge that concern. I also wanted to flag a concern around, I don't know what the appropriate word of it is, but like sort of offshoring capacity to private institutions. No, no poor intention around those private institutions, but there is an obligation that we have around public provision of preschool services that I think the board should be taking really seriously. And I think a third concern I'd want to flag is that whatever creative problem solving that inevitably is required of the really tough landscape of the enrollment and cost containment concerns that the state and this district board are trying to wrestle with, is that solutions really need to be on the table that get creative around full day programs, because that's what's driving parents, working parents, to elect programs that are not in the part-time multi-building programs afforded by the Harwood Union. And I recognize I'm in Warren, and there are a lot of the K-PASS options do create full day coverage for working parents and parents in general there. So thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Shelby. Caitlin, you're next if you want to unmute.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Caitlin McLeod-Bluber. I'm a Moortown resident, mom, and a public school teacher of more than 15 years. I'm also well aware of the many budget challenges facing both our district and districts across the state due to many factors, including Montpelier's difficulties in creating sustainable ways to fund our schools. Similar to Elena's comment, I just want to emphasize how important pre-K programs are for the long-term success of our students. As board members, we think very closely, and you think very closely about the educational outcomes for our students. Hurting pre-K programs will hurt our long-term goals in our education. So while there's difficult decisions ahead, please keep in mind what our teachers need in order to best support all of our pre-K students, and similar to what Shelby said, what families need in order to be able to thrive in this valley. Thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. Shelby. Is there anyone in Zoom that we missed that would like to make a comment? Katie, hold on. We're just. All right, Katie, you're next.
Hi, this is Katie Naden. I have two kids in the Facein school, and both of them went through the pre-K program. I think there's no disagreement that like all of our pre-K programs are amazing. I do really want to emphasize the importance of full-time care, providing enough care for two working parents to be able to send their kids to pre-K, because that absolutely, like our family with two full-time working parents, and very much informed our decision. And we decided to send our kids to pre-K at Facein, and it was hard to piece all the pieces together. That said, both Facein and Waitsfield have access to Open Hearth, and their extended hours to 5:30 are the only hours in the Valley that I have seen that really actually realistically support families working till 5 p.m. And I think it would be a real loss unless the other programs that are designed to support the aftercare, unless we're able to support them so they can extend their hours to actually fully cover working families. So I know there are lots of constraints and challenges, but really making sure that whatever solution we come up with actually supports full-time working parents in the Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there one more that you saw? Yes, just come up to the mic and introduce yourself, Patty. Turn it on, press the button, and lean right in, get friendly.
Make the microphone your friend.
I don't have to hold the button?
Nope.
Okay. All right. I was a Facein parent for many years, and now I'm a part-time teacher, para-educator at Facein. And I know so many families in the Valley and how many people have moved to Facein actually to take part in to be at Facein school and to take part in the preschool program. They've got little kids and now they've got like, where am I going to go? This was my plan. This was our dream for our child. Those are things that I know that budgets are important and we have to make everything work, but I think we really can't lose sight, and I'm sure none of you in this room are, but the kids are what count and the families. There's kids that are in there that have brothers and sisters already in the program. They're going to be shifted to another school and then go back to Facein for kindergarten. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of breaking my heart right now. So that's all I can say. Thanks.
We do appreciate it, Patty. Thank you. Okay. I think that's all for public comment. That's okay. Yes, she is. She just stepped in. Thank you. And thank you to everyone in public comment online. We do appreciate it. We are listening and we are weighing up every detail very carefully. It is not falling on deaf ears. Next, we're going to approve the agenda. Does someone want to, Bobby will make that motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second from Lang. All those in favor say aye. Aye. I'll go right to the leadership report just for a minute. In the leadership report, I put in a section on advocacy because I don't know how many people did their homework today and listened to Phil Scott talk about education and his plans, but it's pretty intense and it's going to rely on a lot of voices giving pushback and giving input to move the needle in a positive way, in my opinion. I wrote a letter. I attached that letter so people could see that. But I think our advocacy could be stronger and better if we were doing that like if we could all agree to sign on to something, or some of us. And if anyone here is interested in testifying at the state, writing a letter to publish on the subjects that we know are worrying. I mean, we're talking about a preschool class right now. They're talking about closing whatever schools they want to really trim the cost. And he was talking about the 2 billion number, like 2 billion for 79,000 students. They want to chop. So that's what's looming over us as we work on the budget, which is very tricky. And I realize it's hard to kind of have the bandwidth to be like, yeah, but what if this happens? What about this? But the reality is we have to do that. And we really have to step forward cautiously with our budget, because next year is going to be just as bad, if not worse, especially if the plans go ahead for Act 73. So if anyone is interested in getting involved with advocacy, email me, talk to me, Steve, and we can work on some joint projects to make our voices heard. I mean, that's the only weapon we have right now. We're the lowest hanging members of government. We're going to take we get the most feedback from the actual public more than they do. So think about it. Reach out to me and Cindy if you're interested, and we'll get something going. The other thing I want to bring up before I give JB a chance to give us an update on building and use is that this is my pep talk about the budget talk we're going to have tonight. None of this is fun. None of this is what we want. Do I want to see a lady I've known my whole life come here and cry about preschool? I don't. Okay, so bear in mind that we're going to do this as gently as we can. And if we think about it in terms of staged, we need to start with the first stage. So let's just stay there for now and let's talk about that. And just gird your loins. Remember the missions that we all wrote. The Dr. Mike forwarded around the document that was all of our main concerns are what we believe to be the most important things to us. Keep those things in mind, because this is when we're coming down to it. Today is the 7th. We get to talk today. We get to talk next week. And then we have to warn the budget on the 21st, the first budget. I hope the only one. Now I can hear myself, and that's annoying. So anyway, we'll move on so I don't have to. Did you do a written report? You didn't. No. Okay. I have told the students they're going to give us a report next time. Right. If anyone, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind, Dr. Mike, in response to the comments about preschool, if you could talk about just what we're really talking about, because I keep hearing we're closing 3 classrooms. We're not even talking about that. So I'd like for you to just elaborate on what we are talking about.
Well, and I'll just step back and start talking a little bit from similar to Ashley, that, it was January 31st, 2022 that I sat in this room. This fresh person from Pennsylvania looking to move to Vermont and make a difference in a community with really great kids. And that's what attracted me to finally say yes to this job, was walking out. I know I shared this with the board before, but I did my kind of tour, and the board chair at the time said, why don't you just take a breath of fresh air? So I walked through the halls, and I walked by the entrance, and there were a couple of students sitting there who looked at me and said, are you interviewing to be the superintendent? And they engaged me in a conversation for about 10 minutes. And a couple of them are still here. I still know them. They were in 7th grade at the time. So they're in 10th grade now. And they were charming. And the students I've gotten to know, 3 of whom are here, are just charming. So when I sat in here, we talked, some of the questions, I've been a superintendent now for 17 years. So one of my questions was about budgets. And I remember a board who I won't name, but it's no longer on the board, who said, don't worry about that. We always pass budgets. So I can tell you what was on my list of questions was not to say, boy, if I come here, I would really like to cut programs and cut money from the budget. May I cut money from the budget? I would love to do that. That was not part of my goal. Part of my goal was to make programs stronger. So fast forward a year, we had that first year in 2022, 2023. It was a very good budget year. We were still in COVID. We still had federal money from the ESSER money, and the budget passed overwhelmingly, but we still had a lot of cost pressures. And then the next year, and I'll go into this a little bit with Lisa when we talk about the budget, but we had Act 127. Act 127 shifted how schools are funded in Vermont. So they basically took the same pot of money, schools that had communities like ours that supported budgets and supported rich programs. I don't know how to say it any other way than school districts like us were the ones who were shortchanged in the process. Money went in a very correct way to districts that were underfunded and had high needs of students that were not being properly taken care of. The problem is they didn't expand the pool of money. So it was basically shift the resources from one to another. And that's when we had 2 budgets that failed. That's when we had to make extreme reductions. So having, that's a long way to say what we're engaged in right now. To Ashley's pep talk, she had to give me a pep talk earlier today, because this is not something that we enjoy doing either. Lisa's comment, who's just walking in now, was that she came from higher education, working for Rutgers University in New Jersey, a very large university, which, higher ed's a tough time. And her comment to me today when we were preparing for the meeting was, I thought higher education funding was difficult. It's nothing compared to this. So fast forward to pre-K. I'm not a person to play with words. I'm a very upfront person. We are not looking to cut pre-K. We are not looking to tell parents that we don't have space. But I will go through the numbers with you that we've been working on as an administrative team. This year, we have 4 sessions at Brookside, which is 2 teachers. We have 3 sessions at Moortown for 1.5 teachers. We have 2 sessions at Fayston, 1 teacher. And I'm saying that because people have been confusing the kind of what worth considering for next year. We have 2 sessions at Warren, which is 1 teacher. That's a total of 11 sessions, 5.5 teachers. By state regulations for pre-K, which is different, it's not governed through the Department of Education or the Agency of Education. It's very intense regulations, much more challenging, governed through the Department of Children and Families, DCF. We're allowed to have 15 per class. So if you take 15 per class in 11 sessions, we have room this year, today, for 165 pre-K students. We currently, if you go back to the enrollment report from October, we currently have 196 pre-K students who are Act 166 funded. So they are funded through state program that allowed public entities like us to have pre-K programs in schools and also pay for students who go to pre-K elsewhere. And there are many who choose that for reasons that people who were on the session talked about, because if you have a child and you have 2 parents who are both working parents, or 1 parent, a single parent who's a working parent, you can't go and you have to have 100% care for your children. So, so not all of those students come to our public schools because we only provide, in the case of, it's for the most part about half-time. It's a little less than half-time actually. So if you go to Brookside, you can either go Monday, Tuesday, you can go 2 days a week, or the other 2 days of the week. Teachers have prep time during one day. But the reason for that is that the state, through Act 166, and if you through Act 166 and also Act 127, which is the weights, if you look at the weights that Lisa puts up on the board, and people sometimes are confused with those numbers, you'll see for pre-K 0.46. So what that means is the state supports through funding 0.46 of 1 student. They don't support a student to come to school 5 days a week. So if the board were to decide we want to do that, then we would be saying, okay, we're going to have to shift resources from other programming to pre-K. So back to the question, this is a very long-winded answer, but I felt with all the people on that we needed to give somewhat of a full explanation of why we are looking at so closely, and it's not just looking at spreadsheets, we are looking very closely at what our capacity is in our schools and what the needs are. And we want to make sure that we provide to families who can take advantage of our program, which is not full-time at this point. And Governor Scott today, when he talked about cutting funding to education and growing costs, he also talked about growing and putting more money into pre-K, which would change the equation. But if you take a look, going back to my numbers, we have space as of today for 165 students. As of today, we have 127 students in Harwood HUUSD classes, which means we could have another 38 students show up tomorrow and be able to legally place them into classes. We're looking at numbers for next year. We shared with the board in November, and people who are watching, we weren't at that meeting, can go back to the first meeting in November and take a look at our enrollment report. We looked at birth rates, and we have seen from the state, again, from actual numbers from the Department of Health, the Vermont Department of Health, that our numbers have been declining in Vermont. I can't remember. Lisa's really good with numbers. I forget numbers. I was the history teacher. She's the math expert. But the number, if you look at the number of births in Washington County from 2023, it was significantly down. Ashley shared with me from the town meeting at Warren that there was 1 birth in the town of Warren in the year 2024. So there were 6 deaths, which is also, when you listen to the governor's discussion about population decline, if you have 1 birth and 6 people die in a town, your numbers aren't growing unless you bring in people to live here, and that's another discussion that is not in my purview, but that's what we're looking at. So one of the things that myself, Lisa, and our principal team who has pre-K programs said is we need to get a better handle on what our numbers are to make sure that we know ahead of time how many students we have coming into pre-K. So we put a huge effort this fall. We developed a survey. We put that survey out. I sent it out to all families within the district. We asked Lisa Loomis and Lisa Galoti to put it in the newspapers. They put it in the newspapers. We put it in Front Porch Forum. We had principals who went to their teachers and said, hey, if you know of anyone who has a child who's coming up and isn't on our list, please let me know. We called people. We got as many people that we could find who actually live and have children who are under the age of 4 and under to make sure that we're getting as many people. And our numbers next year that we are seeing show a decline from the numbers we have this year. So that means that 38 vacancy that we have is going to increase. So that means in some buildings, when we started looking at what the buildings were, it means that some buildings that have 2 sessions, one teacher would have 5 or 6 students in a class. So when we're looking at really tough budgets, do we want to have the question we're asking ourselves? And if the board wants me to go in a different direction, I'm happy to do so and find other areas. But if we are looking at 5 or 6 students in classes that can have 15, and that's not all the classes, that's some of the classes, but if you look at the average, it's a lot lower than the 15 that we're permitted to have. So that's how we came to this discussion. I am an advocate for early childhood education. I would love to expand it. I would love to keep a program at every single school. And if we can find a way to do that, and that's something that we're not looking at, please reach out and let me know. But right now we have very tough decisions to make of how do we maintain what we're doing in a way that provides quality to everyone. And that and this is the part where I will get emotional too. It's getting harder and harder to do every single day. So that's a very long-winded answer, and I apologize.
Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate that. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Sounds all right? Okay. Okay, so we had a building and use meeting Monday night, and we were there to discuss some of the other more future options, and we'll get a little update from JB.
Does this work? Good. Yeah, so picking up where Mike left off, and this committee was pretty much formed last year to take a look at some longer term planning solutions, given the budget landscapes we have been in the last few years. The meeting on Monday was more or less called and geared towards the conversation from the last school board meeting, which had to do with 3 different potential scenarios as far as the budget is concerned. So on Monday afternoon, we had some updated numbers from the state. So the landscape kind of changed, at least for this budget cycle. So the tenor of the meeting was a little bit different than what it planned to be. We got a rundown from Mike and Lisa as to the updated numbers and the amount of money that we would need to cut from the budget. We did request that Lisa come back to us with some potential costs and net savings related to option 2 from the December 12th meeting, which hopefully I think we'll learn a little bit more about. I think the way I left the meeting is this is not obviously sustainable, as we all know. Band-Aids every year are not going to do the trick. So I do think it's important for this committee going forward to really hone in, now that we have the facility evaluation reports, on really trying to find longer term solutions to this issue. So again, we called the meeting to really, it was more or less an emergency meeting to take a look at these options. We got the updated numbers. They looked a little bit better. So we talked about a wide range of things. But I came away with that, just definitely sure that this committee needs to take a look at some long-term solutions. Otherwise, it's not sustainable.
Does anyone have any questions for JB?
Mr. Weir, you appear to have a target on your head. It's painted right there on your hat.
It's not the first time, Ben. Your jacket is very nice, though. I like that. Thank you.
Actually, I want to go back to Dr. Mike's discussion. So there seems to be, from talking to people in the community, talking to you, there seem to be kind of two interrelated issues with pre-K. One is the numbers, and one is the fact that we don't offer full day programs. And not having a full day program seems to be a disincentive to sending your kid to one of our pre-K programs. So I'm sure it's too late to adjust the programs for this budget cycle, but is there a method to think about turning some of these programs into full day programs and making them more attractive to the parents?
There we go. Okay. So if the board says we want to put more funds into the program, first of all, we have to figure out what the legislature is going to do with expansion, because right now, like I said, there is not an incentive. There is a disincentive to have full day programs for pre-K. It also, regardless of what happens, it's money from the education fund that would fund that. So the board would have to be willing to say, I'll just pick a number out of thin air. I'll say, let's say we have enough capacity for 10 teachers at part-time, just to make it even. And the board said we want to expand to full-time. That those 10 teachers become 20 teachers. So it's a question of where we want to put the funds that we have. So right now, we're not seeing increased revenue at a decreased property tax rate. So the board would have to, at this point in time, be willing to go to the public and say, look, we feel that pre-K is so important that we want to have it to a greater degree, and we need you to support this through the money that you contribute to the budget through property taxes. And that's, Lisa, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that's it doesn't change, and that's where we'll see. I know Representative Woods from Waterbury, hopefully that she can join us in the future, but her committee is looking at it. But again, the governor talked about increasing pre-K today, and that would be wonderful. But in order to do that, there has to be dedicated funds to do that, because right now it still is coming out of the education fund. There was a child care tax that they paid that was implemented, was it 2 years ago, Lisa? But that money doesn't come into the education fund. That goes to other child care providers. So that would be a question for Representative Wood, of what will it take. But with the 40, if you think that a weight of 1 in the weighting of the long-term weighted average daily membership, that's the average cost of a full-time student. If the state's only providing 0.46, there's a gap, and that gap has to be filled somewhere. And I know it's, my focus has always been education and programs and having quality programs, and Lisa's is to take a look at those numbers. But it's also my responsibility to the board is also to make sure I'm proposing things that we can afford that doesn't bankrupt us. And right now, that's what's becoming increasingly challenging for Lisa and me to do.
This probably is not even an option, but can we offer part-time as we do now and then offer full-time on a tuition basis?
We would still have to, we would be looking at a teacher at the rate in the collective bargaining agreement. So that would be, we'd have to figure out what those costs were and whether that, we'd have to ask if that is even permissible. But I will also say that there's some schools that have had partnership programs. So for example, Warren has the K-Pass program which provides the other half of the day. I know Ashley's very familiar with that. I know Bobby's very familiar with that from her time in Warren. So there are other options, but it requires that public-private partnership that we have. Otherwise, you're looking at at some kind of cost that I'm not sure what that would calculate out to for families.
Anybody else? Oh, Bobby, go ahead.
Essentially, I was just going to ask about the K-Pass and how, what my understanding, and that the preschool program would then make it a private daycare is basically what it would be. So if they were in, if we offer the halftime preschool that we do, and then for anything after the preschool hours, could that be operated as a separate? I thought that was operated as a separate daycare.
K-Pass works by the preschool time butts up against the K-Pass time, and they flow from one program to the other. And it's all kids their own age, and they can nap, and but it's private and it's paid for, and it's a nonprofit that's been in existence for 20 years. And it was not an easy program to launch. I was there for that. It was complicated. Bobby was there for the launch of their after school program that I worked for, but then it was tricky to get K-Pass up and running. Lang, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, I mean, Moortown's got neck of the woods. They do the aftercare there for pre-K. That gets you to the end of the workday. And then K-Pass goes till 5:30 this year. Last year was 4 o'clock. They're very adjustable there to get all day care. Open Hearth exists at Waitsfield, so there are some pre-K kids that used to go there. There used to be Open Hearth at Facein. There isn't anymore. The problem in Facein is there's no off day care for the kids on the other days. So Neck of the Woods is absorbing a lot of that, but a lot of people in the community, they want to bring their kids to one building and pick them up from that same building, and that's the real challenge. But there are private vendors, but it's just a matter of it has to be financially reasonable, and people will come in and provide these after school options for us if we can make that happen. And I think that's the bigger driving is sending people to other schools, is that we don't have that all day care, and that's what they're looking for. So solving that issue would be huge.
And I will also say from our discussions with principals, when you look at the Facein school, there is not another. There's the classroom for the pre-K, but there is not another classroom to be able to give to a private provider like we are able to do at Warren for K-Pass.
Well, they could. Yes. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they split the days, Monday, Wednesday, and Tuesday, Thursday. But there could be aftercare for the 3-year-olds on Monday and Wednesday, and aftercare for the 3-year-olds on Tuesdays and 4-year-olds. But that would work, but they don't have that off day care. So there still has to be another provider in the valley to take care of those kids. But just like I said, it has to be economically viable for that person.
Economically viable in that transportation piece too. If you move a kid in the middle of the day or in the middle of their day, it doesn't work. So it would have to be everywhere. Okay, anybody else on this topic? Okay. Refer back to my pep talk now. We are going to talk about the budget. Lisa's going to update us and Mike, Lisa and Mike, Lucky Mike, are going to update us from our last meeting.
Okay, we've done a lot. Lisa and I have done a lot of discussion and preparation for tonight. I will start off by saying we have what I think is relatively good news from the last meeting, and Lisa and I and our other staff, but primarily Lisa, myself, and Brett Zeno, who many people don't know, but when people see names I will give a shout out to Brett, because when people see names in central office and think, hey, what did all those people in central office do? Well, Brett Zeno is a person you don't know, who spends his days combing through our data, making sure Power School is fully aligned, making sure that working with people like Curtis, who also has a hand in some of our student accounting purposes, because everything is very technically driven in the world in which we live. So we have been going through with a fine-toothed comb all of our reports, and we have, and Lisa can go into a little more detail, but we have seen a good increase in the long-term weighted average daily memberships, or our weighted students, which is good news because it lowers our costs, our cost per pupil, which means we're at a point where we think we can recommend a budget. Well, we are going to recommend a budget to the board, a number of 5.4% that keeps us under the excess spending threshold, that will require some reductions, but reductions that we don't think are to the degree of what they would have been a month ago. But that's a piece, and Brett's an integral piece of that. We went through information. We fought with the Agency of Education over some of our EL designations because, again, everything is very technical. So I can go into the weeds and tell you some of the pieces that would be mind-numbing, but illustrate how many different systems there are and how the information feeds into one system. But I will share with you one of the things we did immediately after, and the board remembers getting a message from me, is that we went through and looked at our free and reduced numbers. And even though we are universal meals, we still ask parents to fill out a form, an income verification form, which is voluntary, which does then designate some students for services that would classify them as in that free and reduced lunch category for a higher weight. So we did that, and we did a lot of other work, and those numbers did improve to where we think it was reasonable that, as a superintendent, I have to sign off at one point to lock in the numbers, and I did so yesterday. I think yesterday or on Monday. So we have locked in our numbers. We think they are realistic and where we probably should be. But that work has been done. But I told Lisa I would go through some of the early slides and talk a little bit about some of the background and how we got to where we are today. So this is a slide that I originally saw when I was on the Commission for the Future of Public Education in Vermont, that talks about our education finance system, which I will say very, very directly is broken. Our state education funding system is broken. And it is putting districts like ours and many other districts, most other districts across the state, at a disadvantage. And there are many things that aren't talked about. So there's spending, what we spend, and that spending, when I think of spending, I'm mainly thinking of those things that are cost drivers, and the things the governor did not mention today, that Vermont has the highest healthcare costs in the nation, which account for 15% of our costs, employee health costs. And that's not our employees' fault, that they're high. It's what we owe our employees, but it is a byproduct because not just public education, but all healthcare in Vermont is in the country. And I don't hear that as a top priority right now. I hear it discussed, but that is one of the major drivers. So that's one of the things when I talk about spending that is forcing kind of reductions in other areas. The other is revenue. And we know revenue is also a challenge, and that's the taxes we collect. And we do have, Vermont is a high tax, property tax in other areas as well. So I don't think we're going to see a significant increase in revenue. And then the last thing is the use of ed fund, what comes out of the education fund. There's a lot of things that come out of the education fund that this board has no control over. And just another example I'll give, I've talked to some citizens who complain about property taxes and the things we fund, but then also share that they thought it was wonderful when their child went through school that they had that they were able to take college classes and have the state pay for them their senior year. That's an example of a program that comes out of the education fund that has an impact on our taxes. So people often enjoy extra programs and things that help them out, but the question is, going back to that middle category, are people willing to pay for them? So that's our system and at a very, very high level. And I said this last year, we can't assume that our challenges stem from any one of these things. Our challenges come from all three areas. And back to Ashley's point about advocacy, we appreciate people feeling comfortable approaching us and sharing concerns with the board and with the administration. But most of these issues, in our opinions, are beyond the level of this local control that we have as a board because there's so many things that are outside of our ability to do. So another reminder that to put on here, that's again another hard concept when I talk to neighbors, is that the town taxes we raised, and this is information for fiscal year 23. I had to dig last year to find this information, and Lisa and I have not been able to find the data for FY24, but this represents the town taxes collected in each of our towns for education homestead taxes for those of us who live here full time, and non-homestead taxes for people, whether that's a commercial property or for people who have a second home here. But if you take a look, that is the money that went from our 6 towns into the state education fund, plus other monies from sales taxes and things. But this is the money that went into the fund. So of our towns in 2023, and this number has only increased, of that amount, $50.7 million went to the state. Of that, 42,600,000 came back to us. The others were used in other places because of the Brigham decision from the 90s, because we have towns in general that have higher property values than other towns. So we help support other areas that do not have the same kind of property value. So when people say, when people said to me 2 years ago, boy, taxes went up 20% and you cut services, where did all the money go? What I shared with them was our budget didn't go up 20%. Those areas went to other things to fund other areas. Important to remind people that, roughly 20% of the money from property taxes goes elsewhere. Local pressures, these are some slides that Lisa already shared. These are some of the increased, the increases that the board has looked at that have impacted our budget. And a lot of this, again, these are actual in some cases, they're mandatory in some cases. So there's fewer and fewer areas that we are able to control. And then this is just a reminder of the healthcare that the family employer cost that the board supports is $35,000 per employee. And our employees are also chipping in 20%. Which is also a high amount, so that you're looking at very expensive plans. From there, we'll talk a little bit about the detail of weighted student numbers. So with that, Lisa?
Oh, it's on. Okay, good. So I shared a little bit of information on the Building and Visioning Committee. We have a little bit of a reprieve, and I just want to remind everybody that every time I talk about numbers, it's a snapshot in time. Numbers change all the time. So in this instance, this is a perfect example. If you remember, in fiscal year 25, we were at V5. In fiscal year 26, projecting for 26 last year, we were at V6 for LTW ADMs. Well, we are at V13 as of Monday. And I got the information, the new information, right off the press, right before the Building and Visioning Committee meeting. And we locked down those numbers, and Mike certified those numbers. But just to give you a little understanding, is these numbers are so important. I believe, Emily, you had questioned, or Rebecca maybe questioned, when I did a presentation, why do you say we have control over LTW ADMs? This is important because we do have to have control over, in terms of accuracy, making sure that our numbers are accurate and reflecting what we believe they are. So when I looked over the holiday break, we actually, if you recall, on December 12th in my presentation, our LTW ADM was 2512 weight, and it equated to almost 147 less students. Through the holiday break, it up increased to 2636, and I was jumping for joy, which is great because we had that last push of that free and reduced lunch form for families to go out and fill out. Well, when I looked on Monday, it dropped back down, only 10, but it dropped down to 2625. So at that point, I still was comfortable, and that's why we certified. It's so important to make sure that we're tracking these numbers because it means dollars for us. So I just wanted to point out our numbers won't change. We're certified and we're at V13. Not all districts are certified yet. They could even go even further. Next slide. This number I just want to share with you. This number is the number that equates to the last 2 years of budget cuts. Next slide. And that $6.5 million, this is how our landscape is shaped over the last 2 budget cycles. We've cut 48.9 FTE staff positions, reduction of 1 class per grade at Brookside and Crossett Brook, reduction in administrative position, increased in class sizes. We actually did unfortunately have to eliminate the summer academies, which was funded by the ESSER. We had increased those summer academies with that ESSER funding, and unfortunately we had to pull back. We still have extended year services within our budget, but the increased summer academies, unfortunately, we had to eliminate with the ESSER funding. We had implemented some transportation route efficiencies, building operations. We had a reduction in building operations over the last 2 years. Athletics and co-curricular activities. I believe I pointed that out in several presentations. We had over $92,000 in reductions. We also had reductions in library and technology resources, nursing reductions in the Valley School. And then we also had a reduction in supplies across the district. Next slide. So our enrollment, this has been in other presentations, our enrollment dropped by 27 total students. That includes PK. Without PK, it's 22. Next slide. So if you look at that, if you'll see, I shared what our weights, this is all weights, what our current weight is in fiscal year 26 for these categories. Our current weight is 2659.72. The snapshot in December, the total weight for all of the grade levels, remember, was 2512, which would have been a loss of almost 147 students. We are now at a loss of only 34.67 weighted students, which is very close with the 27 enrollment headcounts. So that's why we were comfortable certifying that number. If you look, our free and reduced lunch, the initial snapshot in early December was weighted at 379 compared to the current year of 502. So that last push brought us back up to 495, which helped us significantly. So that was a major change. That major change in 112 weighted FTEs equates to almost $1.3 million in reductions. So when we were last speaking, I was talking about looking at a reduction to be under the excess spending threshold. We were looking at almost a $2.3 million reduction. So with this new number, it changes. And again, a snapshot in time, things always change. Next slide. Just a reminder, our budget, our total personnel costs in our overall budget is 73%. And just I wanted to point out, in that benefit number of $10.9 million, health insurance alone is $6.3 million. It's a big number, and we have no control over that number. That number is in our overall operating budget projected for this fiscal year is 12% of the overall operating budget. Of just the benefit budget, it's 58%. That's a big number. What I wanted to do, and that's why I was a little late, I fell short trying to get all this into a pie chart. So if we spend nearly $38 million in personnel costs of our total fiscal year projected 27 budget, this is with what we've fully loaded, with no talk about any reductions. My bottom line, what we consider what's below the line, not salaries or benefits, basic operation costs are $14.8 million. Of that $14.8 million, I wanted to be able to give you categories of what we're spending. This is not including salaries or benefits. This is operational costs. And I wanted to give you functional categories, what we spend in athletics, direct instruction, operations and maintenance. In that direct instruction number, I do want to point out there's a lot of tuition that we send out to the tech center and PK. So that number of $2.2 million is really, a lot is tied into tuition that goes out of the district. So, there's not a lot of numbers in here that we have flexibility with. Special ed, there's things in here that are mandated that I still, even though it's below the line costs, I still have to operate and we still have to spend. So when I believe the board had asked me several times, how much control do we have over these expenses? Very little control do we have over these below the line operational expenses. There's a lot of mandated services. We have, of course, transportation, but we have special ed in there. We have debt, athletics. So I broke it up into categories. And obviously, you're going to say, well, we have control over operations and maintenance, but not necessarily, because this is to invest in our buildings and keep our buildings, where we're doing bare minimum in our buildings over the last couple of years. We've had to cut out a lot of contingencies on our buildings, and our deferred maintenance is piling up. And I want to remind everybody, in the past years, with our residual carry forward, we've always had plus $1 million, $1.5 million, $1.6 million. The last 3 years, we've had roughly only $500,000 to carry over to put into the maintenance reserve fund. So those reserves are dwindling. So we're having less and less and less be put into and transferred into the maintenance reserve fund. Do you have a question?
Oh, sorry, Steve. Could you remind us what our exact number of deferred maintenance is? Do you know that off the top of your head?
It's total full in, including what really needs to be done at the high school, is over $80 million. Yeah.
Can I just ask what's Board of Education?
Transportation, I'm sorry, insurance. There's things for insurance for the buildings, insurance costs that we have to pay to visit what's under board insurance. And then there's also, you have a few administrative advertising costs in there, printing costs and things like that. But most of it is insurance.
Yeah, there's categories that are strange, that it's not like the office of the principal doesn't include the flowers that, fresh flowers every day for the principals and things like that. There's other costs, operational costs that are included in things like that as well, right, Lisa?
And I can also provide more detail. I was trying to, there's hundreds of lines below all of this, but I wanted to roll it up into categories where you could see what you really directly have control over, which is very little. Next slide. So I want to point out that red line. That's important. So everybody sees that red line. So right now, with the new LTW ADMs and keeping roughly below the excess spending threshold, where you had asked me to try to keep at least $250 below the excess spending threshold, I can have us have a year-over-year increase of 5.4%, which would be a $2.6 million increase over the current budget, with us being below the threshold of close to $250. That would be a budget reduction of $1,036,000. Whereas a couple of weeks ago, we were looking at a $2.3 million budget reduction. That shift in our weight of 112 weighted students has helped us dramatically of $1.3 million less. So that would bring us below the threshold and under that, close to the $250 under the excess spending threshold. So I kept that number in, and then I wanted to talk about what's the next stage that we would need to do. What could we be doing without any major structural changes in the future that really could not happen by next year. So that's why that red line is there. I included these numbers. 3.4 is the number that we had talked about as a scenario. And then I also included the 2.8, which was in line with COLA. But these would be major structural changes, and this could not happen by next year. So there would need to be a lot of discussion. There needs to be things that would happen and take time. But what I wanted to point out is those are big reductions to be at those numbers we were talking about. With the 5.4, this is, kind of a reprieve with that change in the LTW ADMs, where I'm looking at less than half, like a little less than half, or a little more than half of cost reductions for fiscal year 27. Again, this is just a reprieve and a snapshot in time. So what does that mean? So if you go to the next slide, decision slides, the difference between what we could do this year for next year for fiscal year 27, we would be looking at a 5.4% year-over-year increase. It would be approximately 6 FTEs with a cost reduction and operational expenses of the $1,036,000. Or, I wanted to put this option out. It's here. I wanted, in case anybody came back and said, what else can we do for next year? We could go to 4.9%. It would be meaning a almost a $1.3 million reduction and approximately 10 FTEs. And that would bring us $340 below the excess spending threshold.
But that would be going to some changes that the Visioning and Building Use Committee previewed on Monday, like, combining middle school numbers and some other combinations that would be more work. But when Lisa ran the numbers of related transportation cost increases and other services, some of that, the net was only about $260,000. Not only.
Well,
not only, but if you take a look at 4 additional FTEs, which is much higher than that number came down.
Right. It was 475, but it was, if you look at that between that 4.5 and the 4.9. Okay.
Feedback on the 4.9%.
And to be honest, it only changed the district tax rate by 1 cent. Right. So the difference when you work through these numbers, if you go to the next slide, Mike, 5.44% year-over-year increase versus 4.9, it only changed the district tax rate by 1 cent. So I just want to point that out. So in going through this crazy methodology that we have to go through to get to our tax rate, you'll see we're seeing, and as a reminder, I wanted to remind everybody, we can count the debt to reduce our overall cost per pupil if we're under that excess spending threshold. If we're over, I can't include the debt to bring us down even further. So because and our excess spending threshold is projected to be $16,470 next year, if you look at with using the new LTW ADM at 2625, our cost per pupil is actually $16,444.72. Because we're under that excess spending threshold, I can now use my debt to reduce it even further, which brings us down to $16,229.94. We would be under that threshold of $240. And when you net that through with the current projected yield and our taxing capacity discount with the statewide adjustment, it brings us our district tax rate of $1.76, which is a 3.8% year-over-year increase. The difference between this projection and the 4.9 is 1 cent. It brings it down to 175,465.
And it's also where the complexities are mind-numbing. So if you go back to the slide that I showed that said 84% of our property taxes stay in the district, the budgets of other school, all of the budgets in all the schools impact our tax rates. So when I asked Lisa, okay, what would we need to be below to actually see in towns taxes reduced? And that number is not 1.3 million or 1,136,000. That is what did we?
$5.7 million.
Because you have to account not just for our spending, but for those dollars that go other places. So it gets real complex. But yes, to see a tax reduction
in every town. And
I can tell you today, we can't, not without significant infrastructure improvements and changes and consolidations, we can't reduce. We can't even reduce anywhere near $5.7 million, but that's what it would take under the modeling that we have right now from the state, the numbers we have, to see tax reductions in our district.
Yeah, it was just a quick question. I thought you guys are moving the central office. I thought that was tied to volume 2. So if you don't do option 2, where will your offices be?
We're still moving.
Yeah, we're doing that.
We're moving.
There's still
that is included without any kind of other piece. We're moving here next year. We're giving up that office space.
Awesome. That was just my quick question.
The prep is being done now to make space.
$50,000 savings. Just to let you know, that's saving us $50,000, which has already been plugged in.
Yeah, that's good money.
I was listening to our governor today, who talked about that the tax rates were going to be in double digits. If we're only looking at 5.4, are we really that much better off? I don't know what his double digit number is that he was talking about here.
Well, when you look at the tax rates, when you look at the CLAs, it goes back to 2 years ago. I think we went up. What was our final number 2 years ago? Our final budget increase 2 years ago? Was it 6%, Lisa? Or no, what was our budget increase? It was about 6%, and taxes 2 years ago went up 20%. So again, those numbers don't equate to each other. They're different. They're different numbers.
All our healthcare went up, right? I mean, we all had a healthcare jump anyway, whether you're on the district plan or not. That kicked in just now. So, I mean, everyone's hurting from the healthcare. I'm still waiting for words on that subject, which I think I'll be waiting forever.
So how are we going to achieve the $1,036,000? We're looking at $240,000 district-wide savings, which does not impact classroom operations. I'm looking at $224,588 creating preschool hub centers, which Mike was talking about earlier in the meeting. I'm looking at reducing the reduction of an administrative position at the high school. It's a vacant position that was budgeted. I'm looking at $131,000 in technology support and hardware. Some of those things that we had talked about where many of our hardware is up for renewal for our computers. The ESSER funding funded a lot of that. We have one-to-one devices. We're going to push some of them off, and then so we're going to be able to achieve that in that category. I will be using part of my salary vacancy factor of 124,000. A salary vacancy factor is there's positions that are vacant that I still have to budget for. Right now, when we don't fill those positions, then the costs turn over to most of the time external providers. So I still budget that in as a filling that position. And if we don't fill that position in the beginning of the year, then 9 out of 10 times it gets then turned over to an external provider. But so what I'm going to be doing is using part of my vacancy factor because as of September 1st or whatever the day of start of school is, we won't have 100% of all those vacant positions filled. So I'm wagering and looking in the past over the last 5 years, how much am I comfortable using as that salary vacancy factor?
And I do. Lisa mentioned about the preschool hub centers, and I briefly mentioned that, but I did want to hit the point home to some questions that part of our work as an administrative team is working with providers so that the hubs we choose can have strong partnerships to provide that aftercare that we know is necessary. So I just wanted to make sure that point was well articulated.
We're looking at $100,000 additional reduction in athletics and extracurricular activities. And this is on top of a major reduction already last year. $50,000 in food service subsidy. And what I'm talking about in food service subsidy is by actually increasing our reimbursement from the state. Right now, we are not fully getting reimbursed from the state for our meals, for our breakfasts and lunches. So we are going to be actively making sure that just as a quick note, every time a student gets a breakfast or lunch, we're able to basically click a button and we can submit that in for reimbursement. If those students do not pick up breakfasts or lunches, we can't click that and I can't get reimbursed from the state, even though we've still made that meal. So it's important. So we need to right now, we're only based on our average daily membership on a day, we're only serving about 29% of breakfasts to our students. We need to serve more breakfasts and more lunches. So that subsidy is getting that additional revenue, and that we're going to make sure that we're going to be getting that would offset what we would be subsidizing to the food service department.
So as a real specific example, I've had some parents who've said to me here in my last district, "Oh, I would really like to be able to bring in a special lunch for our children so they can, it's my daughter's birthday, and rather than going to the cafeteria, I want to do something in the classroom and make this special lunch." And so I hate to sound like the kind of the lunch Nazi, but that means if we encourage that, it means those counts come out of our revenue, and they hurt the bottom line. So we need students to be eating breakfast. We need students to be eating lunch, and Lisa and I strategize some ways to optimize those numbers. So, a number of schools do this, but what I can tell you, like for example, at Brookside, when they walk in off the bus, we have a table set up right inside the door. One of our wonderful lunch ladies is there and provides the meal. We make it very convenient, and we try to do that throughout the district for students to access meals. Number one, because nutritionally we want students to come in with full stomachs and eating, but there is also a financial byproduct to that. That's not our primary motivation for doing that, but it is an important aspect to it.
Charlotte and then JB have questions.
Do we know where those numbers are falling short, like what schools they're at?
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Yes.
And like more so lunch or breakfast?
Breakfast, definitely breakfast. But so for instance, to make up that $50,000, I just need to have, let's say, lunches, because the total For breakfast and lunch combined, it's $7.69 for reimbursement. Lunch is more money. It's $4.69, I think. I'm close. I would just need to serve, let's just say lunch, 60 more lunches a day in the whole district to make up that $50,000. So if you take that lunch, divide it by our 7 campuses, it's less than 8.5 lunches per school times 178 days. That's $50,000 right there.
And we don't want to go through the whole list, but we can say that, it's one of those challenges. My job is the educational leader. It's one of those challenges where we have to balance kind of our educational objectives, but also remember that sometimes decisions we make have impacts. So, example at Harwood, when we moved ELOs from the beginning to the end of the day, we did that for very good educational reasons, but we saw a corresponding drop in breakfasts. So, every decision has other ramifications that you have to think through. And going back to the point, there is no the fruit on the tree has been eaten or dropped. So we don't have a lot of areas. So we're looking at every place where we can find to make sure that we're maximizing the revenue that comes into the school.
Going back one, for the reduction athletics and extracurricular activities, can you give a few highlights of what was cut last year or reduced last year, and then in addition to this year, some examples?
Last year, off the top of my head, there were some coaching positions, site supervisors that we eliminated. I worked with Ian and Meg at the high school, and they eliminated some positions that they didn't need as coaching positions any longer. We also trimmed up the bus transportation in terms of the routes and the number of routes that are needed. Supplies were cut down, and he's very particular on what he's ordering at every year and what uniforms he needs. He has it all scheduled out, so he was able to pull back and really have reduction.
And then I will also say that we've had a number of people in our coaching staff, including people maybe a basketball coach that some people may know, who have done a great job of working with their boosters to raise funds. So to kind of supplement that, but we're looking, we are not legally allowed to do pay to play in the state, but we can look for other ways to raise revenues that offset the costs that the district are paying, and they're the kinds of things that we're looking to that we have to kind of trim.
I mean, just gate fees, the increase in gate fees that we've been getting, which has been very helpful to offset supplies. So gate fees are important to athletics.
So it sounds like where the reductions is not so much in the sport, like cutting a sport, but talking about some of the different aspects that might support it versus, so it's not taking away from what the kids are able to participate in. That was last year. Okay. Yes.
So when we want to go back down to the detail level, what I will say is, we have not developed, we have ideas, but we don't have a list to share with you today because we need direction from the board of what number you want. We have a lot of work to do yet. We always have a lot of work to do. For example, we have projections that get refined. Lisa doesn't know what we're going to be paying for propane and oil next year. So there's still work to be done, but I am not going to go to the principals and say, we're going to, cut X, Y, and Z, and then have the board say, no, we don't want to go with that approach. So we have started to have conversations, but I am not at the point today where I can say we're going to go from buying 1,000 pencils to 500 pencils. I'm not at that detail level, and I don't think Lisa is either.
I need at least 3 pencils. I have a question on the salary vacancy factor. I'm not sure I'm following, because if we don't fill that position ourselves, you say it goes out to contract and somebody else fills it. So aren't we still paying for that position just through a contracted service?
in some cases not. So it depends on also if there's a waiting list, if there's not. But what I wager is how much of that, how much I would need at the start of the year. So looking at the cash flow. So how often am I filling every vacant position at the start of the year? How much am I comfortable saying, I'm only going to maybe fill 60% of that? So that's what I'm really using, is looking at my salary vacancy factor over the last 5 years and to say, okay, this is how many vacancies I've had on average. I filled starting December or November. How much of that cash can I use to apply? Even though I fully load it for the school year, 9 out of 10 times for especially IAs, and IAs, there's a lot of vacancies with IAs and a lot of overturn it with IAs. There, I could use those. It's very hard to fill certain IA positions, like for instance at the high school. So I could use that.
Was that list that you just mentioned in response to my question? That was all last year? So you say, so as far as the 100,000 for the reduction in extracurricular and athletics, is that still being worked out as to what those look like? Okay.
But these are these, working with our principals and others, we've looked at kind of our categories, and these are the categories that we would be targeting for the budget for next year.
So in this list adds up to the 1,036,000, which would be a 5.4% year-over-year increase. Next slide, Mike. So I didn't want to get into detail in terms of what that massive spreadsheet of what the tax implications are. But what I did want to be able to share with you is what the statewide adjustment is this year compared to last year. Last year it was 72%. This year it's only 70%. But you can see the CLAs right now. Again, these are not finalized CLAs. But you could see where the CLA in fiscal year 26 versus 27, and then the SA, which is the state adjustment. SA stands for state adjustment, and the state adjustment for each year, and then what the actual percentage changes and what the dollar per change is. Next slide.
So Fayston, my takeaway from this is because of Moortown's reassessment, they are in good shape than they were last year. Fayston's values have really continued to go down over last year. Is that correct?
Correct, because their grand list has gone up significantly. So their homes are selling much higher in Fayston that they have been. So compared to the grand list, that's why their CLAs are. Next slide. Oh, so I did include this. I'm sorry, I did include this. So this is this is the 4.9%. If you look straight down to the bottom, you would be seeing that's only a dollar change in a penny change in the district tax rate. So even though it's an additional almost 300,000, it's only a penny change in the district tax rate. So as JB had mentioned before, that what are the next steps? We would need to have the Building and Visioning Committee involved in terms of the next step, anything more than the 5.4%. Next slide. So this is just a slight reprieve this year because of the LTW ADMs. We're going to be looking at the same road next year in fiscal year 28. When I'm budgeting for fiscal year 28, the storm is not over. We are still up against that excess spending threshold. And there is, as I mentioned before, there's no fruit left on the trees. We have really picked the bones. There's very little contingencies that are budgeted in each of the schools. I'm having issues with maintenance. Ray calls me up and says, this broke, we got to come up with it. So I just want to be able to share with you that this is, we've really trimmed all the fat. We've trimmed contingencies. We are budgeted to the bone. So
Well, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about I did watch the committee stuff, Dr. Mike, that you sent yesterday for, or was it this morning for Senator Baruth? And one of the things that he was talking about is capped spending on schools. And so if that ends up coming into play for next year, how much could that impact us as we're thinking about the future? Because it's clear that Act 73, we're on what, a 5-year plan. So it's not something that's going to happen in the immediate. And when I heard him bring that up, well, I do understand that there needs to be some sort of reining in of things, between, the taxes and what the governor was saying today about, again, pushing the consolidation and benefits of larger classrooms, which I won't get into that. But this just seems like a really big thing to think about right now, because we can't cut much more. And we're going to have to actually start affecting education here pretty significantly with the direction that things are going in, which is outside of our control.
You hit it exactly where we are. In that meeting, and also at the beginning, we reminded that it's either increased revenue. I don't think we're getting increased revenue from that piece. You can look at program elimination, and I'm not talking about, going from, 3 coaches to 2 coaches. I'm talking about being at the point where, and not just picking athletics, but any program, eliminating programs or some level of district realignment. There's not a lot left, because those those mandated cost drivers are not changing. We're not seeing significant reductions in those things that we can't control.
Just kind of one high level figure I wanted to point out is, back in the beginning, you said that we've reduced the budget by $6.5 million in the past 2 years, right? I mean, that's like 12 or 13%. I mean, back in the day when I was working and my department went through a 5% cut, it was really painful. So 13%, I mean, just to echo what you've been saying, we're really cut to the bone now. And I think the next step has to be some sort of advocacy where we say to the state, we've done our job. Time for you guys to do it too.
I heard from Senator Baruth that he's capping spending, but I didn't see any recommendations from him on what programs that are statewide programs that he's looking to advocate reducing. And I didn't hear from the governor what he talked about. He's actually talking about now. One of it, he's been very clear, and he was clear today. If you read his address, and I'll send the text of his address out. But he started talking about, essentially, we need bigger districts, which, as he said before, because we need bigger districts so that we can have fewer schools. And he talked about closing schools and larger class sizes. Except I haven't seen anything where he's actually recommended what those schools should be. What they're creating bigger districts to do is to pass off to the bigger districts the decisions to make reductions, so that they are not, they're not reacting to the way Vermont is designed to do. The people in your town, your 6 towns, his proposal, I think when I counted initially, the district we would be in would be something like 59 towns. So I think it's the push off decisions to larger bodies that are less responsive to their local citizens.
And Baruth's idea wasn't wildly popular. People were like, I mean, we're going to talk about capping right now when we're, picking the bones. So I didn't, I
So I've been rereading, some proposals for helping the situation. When we're talking about we can't generate other revenue in our district, but the state has options to generate revenue from other resources. And that and advocating for that, I'm definitely on that wavelength. I also think working on issues around single payer and health, looking at option that not is not necessarily going to save money, but looking at how to save money in terms of health care expenses is sort of another area that we don't get into, but I'm interested in that because that is making such a huge difference.
And we did discuss one idea of buying people out of their health care. I mean, that is the biggest number. There it is. That's $35,000.
The numbers don't work. They really don't work. Lisa and I talked about it. You have 73 people that aren't taking health insurance right now. So you have to hit over 100 to 115, and there's only 350 people. It just doesn't work. It's a non-starter.
Can you frame for us what you're looking for the board to come out of this with?
So I'm looking right now. Mike and I are recommending the 5.4% year over year increase. And, what I want from the board is a direction that if you do not want the 5.4, what do you want? And then I can bring that list to you. That could be done for fiscal year 27. Remember, structural changes cannot be done in 28, 27.
Yeah, and we're recommending that because we can't reduce, and we think, and I think one of the things that we'll ask for is where does the board want to go? We will, if the board wants more than we want less, we'll do what we serve at the pleasure of the board on this. But the reductions we've made have been significant, but the general public has not felt them. I think you can ask myself, you can ask teachers, you can ask principals. We have reduced. We have students with greater needs than we had 10 years ago, and we are making it work. I'm on schools' email lists, and I see the number of, we've struggled with vacancies for substitutes. I see what teachers are doing covering classes, and we just don't have it, but we've tried to keep that away from parents and families. We just speaking very frankly, and again, it's not minimizing the concerns that were raised by citizens tonight about pre-K programs, but we have capacity this year, and we are looking to, because of declining enrollment, we're looking to create hubs, and that has created a lot of concerns from people, understandably. It's not reducing services; it is reducing locations. And we are, like I said, we're trying to make sure that we're working carefully with the private providers to provide that aftercare. But at the same point, what I think what Lisa and I need to know is, and I'll be frank, we called it the ugly list. Does the board need to see what a list would look like? Does the public need to see what a list would look like? Is that what happens if we don't pass a budget, whatever the board determines tonight, what you think that number should be? What would go? Because things will go. Things will change, and they will impact students, they will impact families, and it will not be the quality of education. And that's what, again, I told you I wouldn't be on my soapbox too much, but I'm on my soapbox because what the state legislature and the governor did not talk about today is how we grow our state, how we increase economic opportunity, how we increase housing opportunities, how we increase public infrastructure so that we have a growing population rather than a declining population. We're not going to cut our way out of this. We're going to grow our way out, but there's not a lot of discussion about that. But I think people need to realize that we're not, Lisa and I aren't sitting on a secret list of things that we can do that will easily decrease costs and make our budget easy. That doesn't exist.
I think that I like what you've put together for the reductions that you have on slide 18. I think that looks great, but I do think that the community needs to see the ugly list. I think they need to see what's going to happen if we don't pass this budget. And I know that scared me to the polls last year. So I think it'd be incredibly helpful to see if you don't pass it and we have to make cuts, it's going to hurt and it's going to hurt really badly. I think it scares people to go vote.
I'm curious how many people agree with Pam on that.
With one caveat, which is we cannot put individuals on that, because community members voting on a referendum on people's jobs is horrific, and we would never put anybody through that. And I want to make that clear for our employees that are watching this in horror, that we're talking about subjecting the public to the choices that they would make in programs, generally speaking, not individuals and their jobs. And that's important.
So I sat in this room before the LTW ADM Hail Mary came in, and our numbers were really tight on the excess spending thresholds. They were $13, $32, and you presented us with a budget that's $240 under the excess spending threshold, which is a very comfortable margin. By your math, it's $85.55 per student spending to keep pre-K, which would put us at 155 below the excess spending threshold. Is that a budget that we would be able to look at? And then if that didn't work, cut pre-K? Because I mean, the outcry from the community to keep pre-K and everything else, and especially, I mean, I am the Facein rep. We are talking about losing pre-K and Facein, so that's where I'm coming from.
We're not cutting pre-K. We're just centralizing.
The pre-K at Facein. Apologies. Okay. I am the Facein rep.
I just want to make sure.
No, just pre-K at Facein. So we're talking about, it is $85 per student cost, which would put us 155 below the excess spending threshold. But is that a point that we're too tight? Like I'm sort of confused, because we cut over $1 million, but we're like well under the excess spending threshold because of that Hail Mary that came in. I guess that's where I'm a little confused.
Right. So we're still very close to the threshold. I mean, don't get me wrong, things could change because we don't know what the final yield is going to be. It could be better, it could be worse. We don't know. So these are all projections. And we've been very close to the excess spending threshold all along. And I just want to make sure everybody hears we are not cutting pre-K. I just want to make sure.
I'm sorry. Pre-K at Facein.
But looking at enrollments and looking at, our declining enrollments, is it, and looking at that and making sure the equitable, should we centralize it? Can we have hubs to have efficiencies? It's something we can certainly look at, but, looking at enrollments and declining enrollments, and then the future, what lies ahead in the future, and birth rates. I mean, it was making sense to us.
And I will just want to remind the board that Waitsfield this year does not have a pre-K class either. So it's not just, it would not, and their administrative team, we have a meeting coming up where we're going to take a look at the numbers. We've got a lot of, because of a lot of the emails I've also shared with a lot of the families that have contacted us, that if you haven't let us know about your child, and I had one recently that emailed and said, hey, I'm concerned about, loss of availability close to my house for pre-K programs, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about proximity in your town. But one of the people who reached out, I pulled up my list and I did not see their name on. So I said, please fill out the list and let us know how many children you have and where they are, because that helps us. But that's why we did that. And if the board wants to keep that, that's fine. That number gets extremely close to the threshold. And the other thing Lisa said, we don't know what the final yield is, but the yield improved last year. But the yield improved not because there was increased revenue that the state found. It's because they used reserves rather than funding the construction fund, which we've been yelling about. They did what the governor he said he knew it was not a responsible thing, and that was to use your savings to buy down your expenses. And I understand why they did it, but it was a bad decision, and that's why. And they talked about it again.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm trying to think of what's prudent. Yeah. And Lisa, you said this is a reprieve. Yeah. We don't know. We're what, a little temporary. So the thing is looking down the pike at the future and things that we're going to have to do. I realize we're trying to cushion the blow, but if it's coming, I mean, I don't know what we can predict and what we can't. We don't know at the federal level, and we certainly don't know. I mean, one thought would be if we had different leadership at our state level, and I think this is really important for people to hear, that we have a governor who favors an austerity budget. And there may be savings and things that we need to make. So I'm not sure where I stand. I mean, I don't want to sound like the big ogre and say, well, no, we shouldn't do that, But part of me is saying, well, there are we have to work with the whole community. And what can we do? Where else can we achieve savings?
I applaud your efforts in the 5.4 budget, which I think is really a pragmatic, logical approach. I'm curious if you had mentioned that there might be 435,000, I think was your number, available with the grade realignment. And I'm wondering if we combine the two and we did the grade realignment and the 5.4, what that means programmatically. Like, can we keep all that stuff basically for another year?
So are you talking about 4.9?
So if we did the 5.4 as it's outlined on your presentation, but we also did that grade realignment, right? So there's another few $100,000 savings there, which we could put back into spending for maintenance reserve, for whatever these other programs that might get cut.
That's the 4.9. Yep.
Right. Staying at the 5.4. Yeah, I think Dr. Mike understands what I'm saying, right? Using the, yeah. Yeah, so using basically the outline of the 5.4, right? So that amount of money below the excess spending threshold. But considering the grade realignment that the Building and Use Committee talked about on Monday, which was 400 and something thousand dollars, right? So you put that back into the 5.4, and that basically means we can keep some of those things that we're cutting, or some of those positions, or add to the maintenance reserve.
You'd basically be trading off. So say if we do that merger, which I included in the 4.9, take off some of those things of the 5-point list, which was on my list. What page was that? 18. And then I do have in the maintenance reserve, I do have a $500,000 budgeted for maintenance reserve transfer.
Yeah, I just put maintenance reserve out as one example, but some of the things that we're talking about reducing or cutting, we could potentially keep if we went that approach, at least for one more year.
That would reduce positions, though. That realignment involves a lot of jobs. Just saying.
Right, but I think
Steve, then Emily.
Sorry, one last thought on that. When we did the board priorities, everybody talked about saving programs, right? But nobody talked about saving grade alignments or physical space as it is now. And so I'm curious, I guess, why we're not putting more thought or more.
I think we were saving it for next year, Dan. You know what I'm saying? That, I mean, honestly, when we've talked about it, we're trying to go light so we don't have to go heavy right now. And we have to save something in the back pocket to get rid of next year is like, I mean, or to change.
I get that. I'm looking at it from the flip side.
I see that. Yep.
Saving it is keeping as many programs for as long as we can before we have to get rid of them.
But the first option one doesn't lose programs. It realigns the preschool program, but doesn't lose any other programs. If we realigned by merging the middle schools and doing that realignment, that would cost a bunch of jobs and be a dramatic change to the district. Like that might, in my view, that takes more than the 8-9 months we have between now and school starting again. That's just my opinion. But okay, Steve, then Emily.
I want to get back to what Lang was discussing about this $85 cost for keeping pre-K as it is. So a couple things worry me about that. I mean, I know there's been a lot of input from the community to preserve pre-K as it is, particularly in Facein. So one thing is, I think I remember Lisa saying she'd be kind of getting into her comfort zone if we were $400 below excess threshold. So now at 250, we're already cutting it close. And another 85 would be even thinner ice. And the other thing that bothers me is if we keep pre-K the way it is this year, I wonder if that just means next year we have the same discussion, except we're in more trouble. So that's my thoughts. It's not a pretty picture.
All right. Well, Steve stole a little bit of my thunder. But no, it's okay. I mean, it's an unpopular opinion to share the idea of needing to create these preschool hubs. I think one thing that everybody should consider, board members and the community, is one of the big factors that is driving our having this conversation is enrollment. And, sharing that in 2024, the town of Warren had one new birth, right? So in theory, if nobody else moves, if nothing else happens, in 3 years, there's one child that is going to be signing up for preschool. And so I think it's a very hard thing to think about. And we all know how important early education is. I had one child that was able to be in preschool. I had another child that was not able to go to preschool. Because at the time, Brookside, there was only so much availability. And I can't remember at this point why we didn't look into other options. But the one that was the most convenient for us, there was simply no availability. There was a waiting list. And I think it was 2 sessions every day, 5 days a week, back at that point. But I think that's one of the things that we have to consider when I say we, board in the community, is that there is a sad decline in the need for preschool. And with so many limited resources and already talking about having to make some very tough decisions, if we keep preschool aligned the way it is right now, as Steve just said, what happens in 2 years? What happens in a year when you have 3 kids for preschool in one school, you've got 12, in another? Is that a good use of our resources? And is that giving the children the environment that they need when you're talking about such small numbers that might be in that classroom?
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead, Ben.
I would like to think about an optimistic future rather than a pessimistic one, in which we are not overcutting to save ourselves a little bit of grief in the future. This is a backtrack from where I was maybe a year ago, where I was seeing sort of a cliff, and I was saying, let's overcut now because we're going to have to cut even more next year. And I'm seeing a change of tides in the fact that we cannot predict at this point what the state is going to do, what the federal government even is going to do. Or what the local government is going to do in terms of being able to provide funds or people coming and going. But we've been given a mark, and that mark is, look, we've got this threshold, and we know how many FTEs we can cut up until that threshold, and we know that we can be under that threshold before we are penalized, and we can sleep at night knowing that. If we start cutting extra because we start thinking to ourselves, next year could be worse, we've got to justify that in our heads. And it looks like for those 4 extra FTEs, we're not getting a lot of bang for our buck. And so I wonder, I know that the administration needs to take their marching orders from us, but I think we were pretty clear with them right off the bat that we wanted to be under the threshold, but we didn't want to cut. We weren't cut happy. we wanted to cut only those that were essential to cut so that we could be under the threshold. And that was where we were at as a board. I don't think anything's changed in that. But I'm pretty sure that when I look to the future, I'm not seeing something that is a really terrible outlook. I'm seeing a lot of flux. I'm seeing a lot of change, and I'm seeing a lot of question marks. But I'm not seeing a dire future. I'm seeing people that are currently in power. They may not stay in power forever because they don't have a lot of answers that are answering the questions that the people of Vermont have. So that's just food for thought. But that's, for me, not a reason to worry. That's a reason to hope. So.
Thank you, Ben, for that optimism. Okay, so we're going to need to start to wind up our budget discussion, but we've had some ideas here, and we need to make some choices. I think we all are kind of on board with Pam's thoughts on the ugly list and making sure, without personal jobs on the line or, in a very up here view, what we would be looking to do if we can't pass our first budget attempt. So that I agree with. I think a lot of us do agree with that. So we want to go forward with that, Mike and Lisa, that we definitely want the ugly list out there, or at least somehow we're exposing that to the public. We need to, maybe we want a straw poll about the 5.3 and as a jumping 5.4, sorry, as a place to jump in. And that is the $1,036,000 increase that puts us $240 under the threshold. It gives us a place to start that is reasonable, at least feels reasonable to us. It is an increase, so that is, tenuous, but we do need to give these guys some direction. So does anyone have any comments on that big picture question, or are we wanting to straw poll about this 5.4? Emily, go ahead.
So being a new board member, what specifics, like, can you be specific about the specifics? So for example, there's talking about the 131,000 in technology support, okay, so that is a job. And then when it comes to the athletics reduction, do we need to be more specific, I guess is what my question is, other than agreeing with these reductions that have been laid out here being ones that we are comfortable with and make sense to us, and we agree as a board that these are the kinds of reductions that we need to see.
So some of it is delaying IT pieces. The reason I'm happy to come back and give you more details, but I'm without saying this is the number, I don't want to dive down into that detail level yet because yeah, I mean part of it is the board trust the administration. You give us the overarching categories. I think there is some level of detail that we'll have to share with the community, but at the same point, you know, it's our job to take the marching orders of cut this area, don't cut this area, and then that detail. Sometimes it gets into fine detail. Sometimes there's things that in January, Lisa and I think are going to be needed to be reduced, and by the time the budget passes in March, we get other information that we're able to shift categories. So the example I gave earlier was utilities. So I'm reluctant to say without more specifics on what the number is that this is exactly what would be reduced because in some cases we're not in those categories. We're not talking about teaching positions, but we are talking about potentially in some categories there may be impacts on stipends. There may be impacts on positions. So I don't at this point want to really. Some of the details I don't have at that level. I can't tell you. I can't pull up the athletic budget and say that this specific is changing. This isn't because we're still working through those pieces with Harwood.
Okay, thank you. That's the kind of clarification that I was looking for what it was that you were looking for from us as the board. Yes.
Lisa, when can we expect the final number as far as the yield? And okay.
Yeah, it's usually late May, early June, and even last year we went into May thinking we knew what the yield was, and then they pulled the last minute surprise. So that's you know. And the other piece is we at least listed the CLAs, but if you go onto the state's website, they're listed as preliminary. So even that is not final yet. So again, we're not trying to not share information and be kind of cagey about it, but we also know that once we put something very specific on paper, and Lisa says this is what that is, and it changes once you get it into someone's head, you don't get it out.
Right. That's why I keep saying it's always a snapshot in time. It's a snapshot in time as of today. Numbers change all the time.
I'm sorry. All right. So we're here at this moment looking at that 5.3 or tweaking it, 5.4 or tweaking it, or talking about it, or taking a straw poll to see if we want them to dial down on that particular budget for our first go out.
Please. I love these mics. I would say that I have a pretty implicit trust actually in Lisa and Mike, and they have come and recommended to us that this is what they could do with those numbers that they have today to share with us. And so I would propose either a straw poll, if that's the way you want to go, Ashley, to support the notion of a 5.4 budget, starting budget for next year.
Okay, that's an easy. Dan, you look like you're burning up. You want to say something? I can see it. What do you want to say?
Like, I think the general consensus is that 5.4 is about the right spot. I just am still questioning the ability to do both within a year. Like I'm not sure how to explain it, but so rather than say cutting Some of these things on the slide 18, we do the grade reconfiguration piece and we keep some of that stuff and we're still at 5.4.
Yeah, I think if I can build on what Dan's saying, for instance, like the 100K for the reduction in athletics, if we could keep that money, but then look at the grade, like could we see what actually and maybe this is what's going to happen when you give us the ugly list. Like maybe it's part of that. I don't know. But like if we could see what the grade reconfiguration is so that as a board we can look at it and say, oh, wow, we can reconfigure the grades and then save the preschools or whatever it is. Like, could we actually see that so we can compare and contrast what the options are?
I mean, we can, I provided preliminary numbers. Minimum for the grade configuration would be 475,000. That's minimum.
And I would also say too that
things that we could be saving.
And I know there's a lot of discussion, and I don't want to preempt the chair of the committee, but what I say is this goes back to the original discussion from the board. The building is on fire discussion with the grade configuration. We gave you something that could be achieved that's not optimal in a very quick timeline. And I know the committee talked and JB talked at the end about the meeting about reconvening in March. And starting to take a look so that we're not caught in the future. So I think, I don't want to preempt you, but that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, we keep talking about grade reconfiguration and this option. I mean, we should get it out here what that actually looks like. What are we talking about? And that's a major, it's not closing a school, but it's a major restructuring. So I think something like that, I don't see the point in going down that road right now in this, this budget process. I think, after the budget passes, whatever it is, then I think maybe these options need a harder look by a group of us to really dive into it and see the numbers. Also using the Truex report, I don't see too much value in that right now, other than getting that ugly list out there so we can, see the crappy alternatives. But I just think that needs a harder look. No offense to Mike and Lisa. I think they've probably done a great job looking quick and dirty as to what that might look like. But I think that's a major change, and I think we need a longer look at that, in my humble opinion.
I second that humble opinion. I just don't see how it's realistic that we could even talk about that kind of a grade reconfiguration for August 27th of 2026. I think if it was something that somehow happened and somehow passed, I think that it would be not well planned, and I feel like it would be disastrous, to be quite frank with what my view on it is. And it might be something that does absolutely have to happen when things get uglier. But for this year, I don't see at all how we could realistically make it happen unless there was absolutely no other choice on this planet. And it would be a very long, long summer.
Just exactly. And honestly, like, even though that's these, fire, whatever you want to call them, buildings on fire plans. It might not be closing a building, but that needs public input. We need to take that to the people, talk about busing, there's a lot of things on the table. And I don't know. I think it's a much bigger discussion.
I'm just going to recommend that we just do the straw poll on the 5.4%, that this discussion is important, but not the right time for it.
All right, we'll go around. If you are for moving forward with the 5.4 as is, raise your hand. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's everybody but, okay, if you're against, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Sit. Yeah. Yeah, what direction what would you prefer, Elaine?
I know it's not popular, but I don't want to see Face and Pre-K being shut down. I think that we increase. I mean, what happens when we increase enrollment? What happens when the community gets after school plans and people can get 5-day, and go to the public schools? These are such valuable experiences. These kids are coming into our big schools. They're seeing the bigger kids. They're developing relationships. They're not in this vacuum of a private pre-K. They get a better education. They get free lunch. I just don't want to see that go away. And, if we close the pre-K at Faison, it's just the nail in the coffin, because that's going to reduce our enrollment. And it's just, I just can't vote for that, but there's a lot of people here. I knew the vote was going to win. I just have to show that I'm not for it.
Amen. Okay. All right. That straw poll did 10 to 3, 12 to 3 with the kids. So, okay.
And I will just
I hear
finish
you.
up that conversation on the shift, just to make sure for anyone who's watching what didn't tune in Monday night. The discussion, it started out of the building was on fire. We needed to do something quickly. That was the middle school students to cross it, move 5 and 6 to Brookside, and you would take advantage of kind of your economies of having all your middle school together, having elementaries that are all elementary buildings. Is it possible? Yes. And I will just say from my experience, I've gone through building a brand new elementary school, doing a major high school renovation, and then doing 5 different buildings, elementary buildings of full-scale renovations, 2 of which we vacated students for a year. So we moved students out of a building so we could just do a quick renovation within a 1-year period. We moved them to other building sites, and that took well over a year of planning to do it well. So can you do it quickly? I think we had before I was here, there was a roof issue at Warren, and they had to move students to Sugarbush. And I found that people, when you're in a crisis, people are very accommodating. But when you are doing something that requires a huge change to do it well and to do your due diligence, it takes at least a full year plus to get that done well. And we could do it, but my recommendation is that that's something that takes a lot of time and a lot of thought, because there's always parts of that plan that you don't think about until you get in deep into the to the details of how that works. We had quick conversations, for example, with First Student about transportation costs. They didn't fully model what the routes would look like. They were doing, this in a couple of weeks.
I agree that it needs more talking. I think that the communities would need a little while to get used to that idea, and that it has been contentious in the past. There are issues. So I don't rule that out, but I think we should go ahead with this 5.4. Okay.
Lisa, what the next step would be?
Yeah, what's our next step? Uh-oh.
Okay, I'll come back to the next step. So what we would want to do is we would want to, next week, she'll come back with the details of the plan, and we'll come back with numbers. We'll start to fill in the gaps. We'll start to share some of the information about the lists of what we would have to hit this year if we had to make further reductions. And then ideally, we would want to come back. It's easier for Lisa if we get that presented, all the details worked out, and then the board say go on that number, and then she comes back with the actual warning at the next meeting that can then the next day, which would be the 22nd, get sent to newspapers for publication. And just to remind everyone, we had a meeting on the 28th, but the budget needs to be warned. So when we do it, the Waterbury Roundabout prints it online, but we also like, as part of that warning process, to have it physically printed in newspapers. And the Valley Reporter, which is our other critical newspaper, by Wednesday night, Thursday morning, they're already out to press. So that means it would be another week. We would have to have the requirement is it's no less than 30 days and no more than 40 days. So no less than 30 days is January 31st. So that's why it's best if we have a really solid document and ready to be warned on the 21st for our annual meeting on that first Monday in March, and that she can go ahead, and so we're not rushed and make mistakes by changing something at the last minute that gets printed out, signed, and then sent. So next week we'll come back with the details. We'll look for the board to say yes, move forward, bring us the warning that we can approve at the meeting on the 21st. And then Lisa will deliver that to papers. We rely on the Waterbury Roundabout and the Valley Reporter, but we do also publish important things like that in Times Argus as well.
Go ahead, Bobby.
Would the ugly list be printed around the same time, or that would take longer to get that?
Yeah, the PR on this, like now we got to get it out there, and we got to talk about it, and we've got to try to get people to vote for it in our towns. I mean, this is, and the ugly list will help that, I think. So yeah, we got to work on that.
And it's not a scare tactic. We really are at the point where we are looking at serious reductions, and there are things that we don't want to do, but they are coming quickly, and that's why we need to. Yeah, I think we've gotten better on the budget. We were really surprised 2 years ago when those numbers surprised us with Act 127, and we had 2 failed budgets. I think we've learned some from that, but we also now have learned that declining enrollment is very real, and it's impacting those Act 127 weights that have gone into effect for the last 2 years. So I think we'll be better next year, but it's going to require taking a look at what the options are and being ready to go, so that we're not looking at the building is burning plan in the future.
Once this budget passes, I mean, we can't wait. We need to start right away at really digging into a long-term plan. And I guess my question for Mike was, there's nothing here, if we start looking at long-term plans, maybe there's shifts in enrollment, maybe we come up with a reconfiguration through the building use committee. There's nothing precluding from the possibility of pre-K to someday come back to Facein or Waitsfield.
We've increased at Moortown. We had an enrollment increase, and we instantly increased the number of classes at Moortown based on what the need was.
If 69 little preschoolers are currently in private preschools, if there is a shift at the state and we do go to a full day, we might see a enrollment increase in our district from that. If the options were better, I mean, who wouldn't opt for that if they could? So I'm hopeful on that front. Okay, that is going to draw our budget discussion to a close. Thank you, everybody. This is not an easy topic. Okay, so we have one action item, which is the announcement of tuition. Announced tuition.
Lisa.
So, sorry, my apologies for before. So announced tuition, we always announce tuition at this time for fiscal year 27. And what happens is it's the tuition that surrounding districts that don't have schools that come into our school, they pay that tuition to us. We generate over $500,000 in tuition coming into our district, and we count that as part of our revenue.
I can go a little further for you, so you don't have to.
Oh, I think I'm good.
Okay, you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
So at the end of each year, so for instance, we announced tuition for fiscal year 25 at the beginning, at the middle of 24. And what we just did is we have to do a stat report every year in August, and they come back and they tell me what is actually allowable. So we just finalized fiscal year 25 and what we actually was allowed. So if you look at that memo, you'll see in fiscal 25, we announced our expenses for $22,340 for 7 through 12, but our expenses actually totaled, and we ended up going back out to those districts, and we had to increase the tuition, so they owed us additional money, because when we do the stat report, they look at the actual expenses, and there was a difference. So there's a true up that we have to do that we just did in December for fiscal year 25. And for elementary, you'll see our numbers were projected a little higher than what our actual tuition was. So we had to go back and we had to make those adjustments for those districts for the elementary. Right now, I'm projecting for fiscal year 27, our numbers based on what I'm projecting in terms of expenses. For elementary, I'm looking at $19,250 for allowable and for announced, and for 7 through 12, $22,500 for $22,500 for 7 through 12.
I had 250. I thought,
yeah.
But it's 500.
500. So that's the recommendation that I'm making for fiscal year 27. There's always a true up. I have to announce to all the districts prior to January 15th. So I need to have board approval. And once I have board approval, then I make that announcement to the districts, and we have it all on our sheets, and we share it at VASBO so we all know each other's tuition rates. And then we always go back and true up. Next December, I'll be truing up fiscal year 26's. Any questions?
So we're going to go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
I mean, I'm just curious, I guess, is there any reason that we would not approve this? And can you just put like a $50,000 announced tuition? It doesn't matter anyway because it comes down to the allowable at the end.
Correct. So it has to have board approval. It has to be done prior to January 15th, and I have to announce it prior to January 15th. But it is actually very important that I go back and true up and to see where we net out, whether we owe or we have a receivable. So
it's just a formula. All right. Do we have a motion up there? Lang, why don't you read that motion?
I motion that we approve the announced tuition rates for K through 12, which will be $19,250, and the grade 7 through 12 tuition will be $22,500 for the announced fiscal year 2026-2027 rates.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Next, we have the consent agenda, which is to approve our meeting minutes from 12/17 and to approve a board warrant in the amount of, I don't know. Go. Okay. $483,896.32.
So moved.
Motion.
So moved.
Do I have a second? All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All right. Student reps, you can skedaddle. We're going to have an executive session now. We need a motion to go into an executive session.
I'll second.
Okay. Why don't you read that? You got to read those words out. Go ahead, Lang, you're up. He's a new guy. Let him do it. Go on, new guy. Yeah, you got to read it.
I would like to motion to enter into an executive session with all board members, Mike, and Director of Finance Lisa Essner, of discussing labor relation agreements for the employees because premature public knowledge would clearly public body or person involved a substantial disadvantage.
Second. All those in favor say aye. Great. Okay. Now we've got a 5-minute break.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Make me happy when skies are gray.
Says we're still in a practice session.
Okay. Welcome back to the HUUSD. Still says practice session, Curtis. Are we back in? We're good. Yeah, good. Welcome back to the HUUSD school board meeting for January 7th. It is 8:48. We are back from our executive session and we are taking no action. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
I second it.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you,
Nay.
everybody.